Call to order the meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals for April the 20th, 2016. Can we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Chester? Mr. Cho? Ms. McLaughlin?
Here.
Ms. Utman? Here. Mr. Warmbrun?
Here.
Mr. Weisskopf? And Mr. Welch?
Here. I believe we have a quorum. Is the petitioner, Mr. Diatley, here, or anyone in his behalf? I am. Then I'm going to, at this time, propose that we change the agenda and have Mr. Diatley's hearing first and then the hearing on the other variance cases second. So I guess we need a motion for that. Okay. All in favor indicate.
Aye.
That motion carries. Then we will change the agenda as indicated. I believe everybody's seen their minutes and they've read them. I'd like to have a motion to have the minutes approved.
I move to approve the minutes.
We have a second for that.
Second.
It's now been moved and seconded that the minutes from the March 16th meeting of the zoning board be approved. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed by nay. That motion carries as well. Are there any written communications?
There are a
Okay.
number of written communications in association with the three of the variances.
All right. Then at this time, anybody that believes that they may wish to testify before the Zoning Board of Appeals needs to stand. This does not obligate you to testify, but if you want to testify, you need to stand and now be sworn. Right hand, please. Do you each solemnly swear that any testimony you give will be true and accurate to the best of your beliefs? I do. Thank you. You may be seated. Do we have any continued public hearings? If not, then I would call for hearing case number ZBA-2016-Major-05. We have a staff report, please.
So the following case, good evening first off. The following case, ZBA case 2016 Major number 5 by Robert Diatley of Barber and Diatley, representing as the applicant for a major variance to allow an increase in the maximum allowable height for a freestanding monument sign from 8 feet to 13 feet at 1106 West University Avenue in the B3 General District. Let me jump ahead to the subject property. This is near the intersection of University and Goodwin. It's zone B3. It's a commercial property. There's a vacant restaurant there currently. Behind the site is the Campus Circle development, which is not visible from when this aerial was taken. The applicant is representing a prospective developer of the property who would wish to tear down the building and construct a new restaurant, a quick service fast food restaurant that would be built by right within the B3 district although they're requesting a variance for the signage of the property along University Avenue. The entire property and across the street is zoned B3. On the future land use designation across the street, the property that's owned by the university is zoned as institutional. The neighboring properties and the property to the rear are all community business as well. There's an existing monument sign that you will see within the exhibits next to the vacant building.
Can you flip that, those photos?
Sure. Let me see if I can. So that just shows the proximity of the existing sign to the property line. That's legally non-conforming. The sign was put in before our current sign ordinance was in place. It is closer to the property line than we would allow in that district if it were to be brand new. So let me just zoom in on the proposed site plan. And I'll just quickly mention the applicant has requested to keep the particular kind of food franchise just not to be revealed publicly at the moment because there's no agreement in place yet. So I'll just be referring to it as the restaurant, the fast food restaurant. The lot is very shallow. It's very rectangular, and the current property would be redeveloped with mostly the same building footprint, although the new building would be set further towards University Avenue. They would be required to have one parking space for every 100 square feet of floor area. For 2,793 square feet of floor area, that's about 28 spaces, which they are meeting without having to ask for any sort of variance. Because it is a restaurant that would be featuring dine-in service as well as drive-through service, by our zoning ordinance, we require the ability of a restaurant to accommodate stacking for the ordering window, the ability to stack up to 6 cars, which requires extra space to be accommodated beyond just the traditional parking and drive aisle. The circumstances of this property require that to accommodate all the required parking spaces with the size of the restaurant, as well as the drive aisle and the stacking aisle for the ordering, takes up the entire depth of the lot as allowed by right. Forces the building to be closer to University Avenue as required, and it also creates for the ability to have a sign identification for both directions on University Avenue. As all of you are probably aware, University Avenue is a very high volume traffic arterial going east and west. It also accommodates traffic bound for the university from the north or traffic exiting the university. So it's a major thoroughfare that a business would want to have proper identification going in both directions, and to do so would require a sign to be placed in front of the building. Our zoning ordinance allows one sign per frontage for a lot with that much frontage if it's less than 600 feet. The applicant is requesting, the zoning ordinance states that any freestanding monument sign, such as the one portrayed in let me just zoom out of that, has to be 8 feet if it is set back between 8 and 15 feet of the property line. The applicant would be putting it within that distance. If it were beyond 15 feet, the sign would be not visible from both directions. Let me just go back to the site plan to more closely identify exactly where the sign would be located. Sorry. The sign would be located right here, and it would be compliant with the setback of 8 feet, but they are requesting for a variance on the height. The maximum allowable height is 8 feet. They're requesting for that to be increased to 13 feet. There are several factors for which the applicant is requesting such a building height. First off, going to the site photos, there is a significant amount of trees that are located along the university which affect the visibility of particular signs. Another factor is the existing buildings. There's another fast food restaurant located immediately to the west, which has a very minimal setback from the property line, as well as the Campus Circle building itself, which is just a little bit further to the east. That building was built with a very minimal setback as well, which was approved in a planned unit development, so that was allowed by the city. It's not a legal nonconformity. The Durst Cycle building to the west as well also has you can also notice has a very minimum setback from University Avenue. So going to the trees on the property, there will be 2 oak trees which will have been determined by Arbor Division, most likely have to be removed, but there will be a tree in the center as well as a smaller tree close to the drive aisle that will be remaining. And because of the importance of visibility and because of the potential blockage from existing trees along the boulevard and the minimal setback of the neighboring buildings, the applicant is requesting for an overall increase in the allowable sign height. And their inability to set it back further is because of the requirements of the building to be placed that close to University Avenue, because of, as I mentioned earlier, the very shallow lot size and the stacking aisle and the drive aisle for the parking lot. If a variance requests to be increased by over 25% is considered a major variance, it requires 2/3 approval from the Zoning Board of Approvals. The criteria that we have in our ordinance ask whether the variance is appropriate or not. Are there special circumstances or special practical difficulties with reference to the parcel concerned in carrying out the strict application of the ordinance? It's a very shallow lot. It's an infill lot, so there isn't much space to acquire more property to expand the size of it or for a different configuration of the restaurant. The placement of the trees along the right-of-way would affect the visibility for the development. Second criteria, the proposed variance will not serve as a special privilege because the variance requested is necessary due to special circumstances relating to the land or structure involved to be used for occupancy thereof, which is not generally applicable to other lands or structures in the same district. The scale of nearby buildings, some of which the Durst Cycle building was built before some of our current zoning ordinance was enacted. The Campus Circle building was built with variances to allow it to be closer set up than normal, as well as the other restaurant to the east exists as a legal nonconformity, so it would not be. It's in our opinion that would not represent a special privilege per se. The lot's constraints and configuration are unique to that particular location. The third criteria, the variance requested was not the result of a situation or condition having been knowingly or deliberately created by the petitioner. The applicant nor the prospective developer had any control over the configuration of this lot. The public street trees have existed for several decades, and that's obviously not of the control of the petitioner either. The fourth criteria, the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. There are other legally nonconforming signs along the avenue, and it wouldn't be the first sign on that street to necessarily receive a variance for either the height or the size. So we determined that it would not alter the essential character of that particular corridor or the neighborhood surrounding it. The fifth criteria, the variance will not cause a nuisance to the adjacent property. The sign wouldn't be blocking, would not be affecting the flow of traffic onto any of the neighboring properties. It wouldn't be affecting the triangle of visibility from our determination. It wouldn't increase the scale of the frontage because it wouldn't be taller than the building. And it would be rather similar to other signs and other existing signs in the area. And then the last criteria is that the variance represents generally the minimum deviation from requirements of the zoning ordinance. And we feel that the increased height is appropriate given the staff feels that the increased height is appropriate given the status of the existing more fully grown trees along the avenue and the presence of just high-speed traffic and importance for visibility of a site with that carries a strong value for any potential commercial use, and it would be compliant in all of the areas, including this front yard setback and the sign area. The only deviation would be the sign. With that said, the board has the following options. They may, with a 2/3 vote, they may vote with a recommendation to approve as requested and forward the case to the city council. They may approve the variance with a 2/3 vote and certain terms and conditions and forward to the city council, or they may deny the request. With that said, based on the analysis and findings of the material, without the benefits of considering additional information, staff recommends the ZBA approve the variance for an increase in the allowable height of the sign from 8 feet to 13 feet, based on the condition that the sign is developed as a monument-style freestanding sign in general compliance with the attached site plan and rendering. So, did you have any questions for me? Mr. Diatley is here, the applicant, available to answer any questions if you have any, but was there any questions that I could answer first?
Excuse me, any questions for staff? Go ahead.
The existing monument sign that is there, how high is the post and how wide is that sign?
The width of the sign is, I don't recall taking the width, but the height of the sign is 8 feet.
The existing post?
Yeah.
And will the new sign be the same distance from the sidewalk?
This new sign will be set back farther.
From the sidewalk?
Yes.
My other last question is, why were the oak trees planted along University Avenue at a taxpayer expense?
It was back, if I recall correctly, I believe one of our arborists said that it was during the bicentennial of 1776. They were to celebrate that event back in the 70s.
I guess I hate to see those oak trees go because I think they were planted to give a certain ambience to University Avenue.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm hearing that a lot of the audience cannot hear, so I don't know if that's a problem in the back. Perhaps they could increase the volume, but in the absence of being able to do that, if you could lean a little bit closer to the microphones, that'd be appreciated.
Well, I'm just asking why the oak trees were originally planted along University Avenue. Were they designed for a certain ambience of the avenue? And are we in the end going to cut down all the oak trees so that we can have
No, the
signage along University Avenue in front of every business?
the removal of the trees does not is not dependent on whether a variance is granted or not. The city's tree removal policy does not allow just any tree to be cut down for the desires of a development. The only way that a sign would be allowed to be removed, or that a tree would be allowed to be removed, is if there were no other circumstances available for the trees to not, or the development to not represent a public safety compromise. In this case, the reason is that our requirements and the IDOT's requirements for safe traffic flow on and off of University Avenue requires the placement of the drive aisles at their proposed locations, as well as their required widths, and the compromising with compromising those standards would be difficult to allow the development to occur. The location of the drive aisles are going to be different than the existing drive aisles. The entrance points on this from the street to the sidewalk in the property, and that would not make it possible for the two oak trees on the ends of that frontage to exist. So under that criteria, the developer would still have to reimburse the city for the value of the trees, but the drive aisles would be too close to those trees for them to survive.
To summarize, the trees have nothing to do with the sign. They have to do with the drive aisle, so it's not really an issue that's part of the variance. What he mentioned earlier about the trees helping to obscure the sign if it were to be at the lower 8 feet height, that is in conjunction with the other constraints of the site, most notably the surrounding buildings being closer to the street.
And also signs that are before and after this property that are not part of its frontage, but that will not be cut down either, but might affect the visibility of the sign.
Are there any additional questions for staff? Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak, please? Our procedures require you have to sign in. You have to
I
sign.
signed at the back if that.
You have to sign in there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As was mentioned before, my name is Robert Diatley. I'm with Barber and Diatley General Contractors. We're a business in Urbana that is working with a established fast food or quick service restaurant that has an Urbana location. They're looking to expand. As a part of our work for this project, we evaluated 7 sites within the community that met size guidelines to allow the business to be established. We worked with the national franchisee to evaluate the vehicle counts and things of that nature, as well as impact on the existing store in the community, or I should say stores, if that's the case. And settled on this site, and I actually wanted to specifically comment about the trees. It was actually, through the course of the last several months, we had made effort to, well, let me back up. The national franchisee recommended that we actually suggest removing all 4 trees. And in discussions with the city and the arborist, it was determined that there's 1 tree at the east end that is already diseased or not doing well, I guess would be the most accurate description. In addition to that, the existing trees are blocking visibility even to the existing access aisles. So there's a traffic safety concern. The Illinois Department of Transportation was concerned as well. And in trying to accommodate all of the various parties that had input, we settled on that the 2 trees would provide the least impact to the city's trees, as well as trying to achieve a positive, or what we feel is a positive development for the city. Beyond that, certainly if there's any other questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Chris has done a great job outlining a lot of the factors of the case, and certainly able, though, to address as needed any other questions.
Which fast food franchise?
At this time, the franchisee does not wish to share
Just
his.
had to ask.
the issue of the location is, this variance is very much an important part of being able to move forward in the project.
Any additional questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this particular variance request, either for or against? Hearing none, are there any additional items for discussion from the board? Go ahead.
Just like to make a recommendation that if we pass this variance, that it be passed with a requirement that this franchisee protect the existing oak tree and actually allow it to thrive, and if it doesn't, replace it.
I believe that would require perhaps an amendment to.
I should also like to point out that that's already a requirement of our tree policy, that existing trees be protected during construction, and should it be damaged, then yes, there would be replacement.
Then I believe then that would be understood to be part of.
It's not enforced.
All right, if any further discussion, then I request a motion on this request.
I move that we approve case number ZBA 2016 MAJ05 for approval.
Could you speak up, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I request that we move to approve this variance.
It's now been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
I think that takes place after the vote. That we vote with that. Okay.
Should it be in the motion that it's going to the city council for approval?
That's an automatic. In the case of a major, you could recommend that city council approve it, I suppose, but that's automatic that it goes to city council.
Again, do we have either a second or someone wants to amend it specifically to include that language? If there is no motion to amend, then again, it's now been moved. Is there a second for the motion? It's now been moved and seconded. We need to call this for a vote.
Mr. Cho,
Yes.
Ms. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Uteman,
No.
Mr. Warmbrun,
Yes.
Mr. Weisskopf,
Yes.
Mr. Welch,
Yes.
and Ms. Chester.
Yes.
Motion carries by the necessary vote to be forwarded on to the city council for their consideration and approval. And when would that be?
May 2nd?
That concludes that matter. Then now call for hearing cases ZBA 2016 Major 02, ZBA Major 2016 Major 03, and ZBA 2016 Major 04. They all concern the same property and request, so we will call those three variances together in one hearing. May I have a report from the staff, please?
So this is a request by Andrew Fell on behalf of the property owner, Dr. Chaudhry, both of whom are here tonight to answer any questions, for two major variance requests of a reduction in the required front yard setback from 25 feet to 15 feet at both 708 and 710 West Green Street, and then a request for a major variance and a reduction of the required side yard of 708 West Green Street from 7 feet to 5 feet. These are two properties. They are single-family homes used for residential purposes. They are in the MOR, Mixed Office Residential District, as are their neighboring properties as well. The rear properties are R5, and there are some neighboring properties that are R5 and R6, but this is mostly in the MOR district. Two single-family homes that were acquired by the property owner, Dr. Chaudhry, recently. The homes are stated by the applicant to be in need of very expensive maintenance at 708 and 710. And the applicant has plans to redevelop them with two separate structures to be used for apartments as allowed by and would go through the development review process with the MOR district. When the applicant had the site surveyed not too long ago, there was the discovery of an 82-inch storm sewer line that runs beneath the property on the eastern boundary. You'll see it's that kind of that chain-linked line right there, set back about anywhere between 7 and 10 feet from the eastern property line at 708 West Green Street. The sewer line is rather large. It provides important stormwater servicing for the West Urbana neighborhood. It runs into the Boneyard Creek, and it exists without an easement. Normally, a storm sewer line running under private property like that would have an easement that protects it from being built over or being damaged during construction or having anything built within a certain amount of feet. This storm sewer, by its form, its size, and its location, predates most of our existing ordinance regarding public utilities and for stormwater management. It would definitely exist with an easement if it were created today. It wouldn't even be the size if it wouldn't even be as wide as it is if it were installed today. But in our subdivision ordinance, our city's public works division public works department is given the authority to require an easement within storm sewers. You'll see on the supplementary material that I passed out the language. Section 2138F2 that says a 15-foot easement with total is required when the easement includes one sewer system in addition to any of the other items specified above. This would fit that category because it is a storm sewer. So 15 feet would be, from the center line of the storm sewer, would be about 7.5 feet in each direction. Because of the unique nature of this storm sewer line, it is much, much wider than most modern storm sewer lines that would be in place. Our public works department would require an extra 2 or 3 feet on each side to accommodate for that larger width to protect the line from being damaged during any new construction or from any building placed close to it, effectively creating, so for any redevelopment proposed on this property, our public works department would require 10 feet in each direction. A member of our public works department is here, Brad Bennett, to answer any questions regarding that. So he can explain that better than I can if there were more specific questions. The issue with the storm sewer line is that it only came up on a survey of the two properties. It did not come up on any title search when the current owner purchased the property. I know a survey isn't always done with purchase of a property, but the applicant and the property owner claimed that they had no reason to believe that there was a antiquated storm sewer, but functioning storm sewer buried below 708 West Green. So in the consequence of the storm sewer line being buried below the eastern edge of the property is that reduces the buildable area significantly by, normally it would be the zoning ordinance states that for the mixed office residential zoning district, that the required side yards must be at least 7 feet on each side and at least a combined total of 17 feet. So if that area were to be rather if the without the sewer line, the side yard would be around 7 feet. If you add the sewer line, which is just a little bit west of where the required side yard would be, that adds another 10 feet to basically pushes the amount, it significantly reduces the amount of buildable area on the lot. As a result, the applicant is requesting variances to allow redevelopment of these properties in regards to the storm sewer line buried below the property. I'll just zoom in quickly on what the existing properties look like now. The property on the west, 710, is legally nonconforming. It is 53 feet wide. The property at 708 to the east, the yellow house is 710. The property to the east is just barely 60 feet, which is the minimum required lot width for the MOR district. The front yard setback, which I'll mention in a minute or two, is for that block is required to be at least 15 feet or the average setback of that block up to 25 feet, at least 25 feet, whichever is greater. The average setback determined from our calculations for this block would be 25 feet. I will bring up a map that was not included in the packet, but in the supplementary material. For a demolition of a property, if a property is demolished, if it were demolished within the rights of the property owner, we would determine that the setback figure to be 15 feet. So with that figure stated, the average setback of this block would be 25 feet. So any requested reduction in the front yard setback would begin from there. A reduction by more than 20% would be considered a major variance. Anything less than that would be minor. The applicant is asking for also the side yard variance in regards to the western. First off, I should mention that these parcel lines are not exact. That's because they're superimposed over aerial photographs. They're as accurate as the best we can, but that's why it looks like the 708 property is encroaching over on the 710 property. But the applicant is requesting, because of the reduced buildable area from the east, a reduced setback on the western edge of the property at 708 from 7 feet to 5 feet, so that he can still develop 2 buildings at that site and have a building that is in compliance with all other aspects of the zoning ordinance, with the variances in regards to front yard and side yard. The fact that it's a narrow lot as it is, and the storm sewer line, which is outlined in blue right there, significantly reduced, almost doubles the size of the side yard setback. They're requesting for a 2-foot reduction in the side yard to the western border of the property, if that's clear. So originally, in our discussions with the applicant was requesting a setback of 15 feet. The reason for that was the reduced amount of buildable area on the eastern property at 708 to put in a development that could meet parking requirements as well as a building that could have any sort of dwelling units at all. To accommodate that, the applicant was requesting a front yard setback reduced to 15 feet from 25 feet, as well as a side yard setback reduced from 7 feet to 5 feet. The applicant was also requesting a front yard setback for the neighboring property at 710 West Green Street so that both of the buildings would be compatible. In our MOR design review guidelines, a lot of the themes are that the buildings have are compatible with each other and with the surrounding building forms, that they maintain some of the existing character of their placement and of their size. And the applicant was requesting a matching reduced setback at the 710 property to maintain some sort of congruency between the 708 property and the 710 property. Otherwise, that and to accommodate the parking needs in the rear. Otherwise, it could be argued that it would look less compatible and congruent if one of the properties were set back significantly further than the other. I should also note that the reduced side yard setback was requested for the border of the 708 property that faces the 710 property. So it would not be a side yard setback affecting 706 or 712. It would be only a reduced setback between the two properties that are already owned by the property owner. So let me just go back to the packet. So in our conversations, we did receive a significant amount of feedback from people in the area concerned about changing the setbacks or allowing a building with a closer frontage to the street than any of the existing buildings on the block. In our conversations with the applicant, we were able to, the applicant agreed to reduce that requested setback to from 25 feet to 20 feet as opposed to 15 feet to make that less severe. So in the supplemental packet that I passed out, there are rough sketches of the property with a reduced site plan of the original request for reducing the front yard setback to 15 feet. But there's an additional one that shows how that might be laid out if it were reduced to 20 feet. The footprints of the buildings and the placement with 20 feet is the second page of the packet that was passed out. And there's also a map you'll see the building, the potential redevelopment footprints over the existing building footprints. The existing buildings are kind of faint, but you can see the difference. This is for if the front yard setback was 20 feet. Superimposed. It's not to scale, but that's the best we could do with it's mostly accurate with the aerial and the plan submitted by the applicant. So you have a chance to glance at that. I'll just briefly go to the criteria. The first criteria is, are there special circumstances or special practical difficulties with reference to the parcel concerned in carrying out the strict application of the ordinance? Well, the storm sewer line was not widely available on most on the common documents that are accessed when a property is acquired. It increases the unbuildable buffer area significantly and reduces the amount of buildable area on the lot. So that could qualify as a special circumstance. When I wrote this memo, I initially wrote 1,500 square feet by the buildable area. I'm not, that the number might be a little below that or above that, but so I'm not a, I would suggest not to consider that calculation as much as just the, how much the increased side yard setback from the eastern side of the property would be. The second criteria is the proposed variance will not serve as a special privilege because the variance requested is necessary due to special circumstances relating to the land or structure involved to be used for occupancy thereof is not generally applicable to other lands or structures in the same district. There are some other structures in the area that might be affected by this line, but not many. This is the only one on that side of the block that's affected by this line, which runs mostly north-south. Municipal sewers, storm sewer lines almost always exist in a public right-of-way and not under private property without an easement. Third criteria, the variance requested was not the result of a situation or condition having knowingly or deliberately created by the petitioner. In all honesty, the storm sewer line was likely installed before anyone in this room was born. It's an antiquated model of storm sewer infrastructure. The fourth criteria, the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. In looking at the variance, the side yard setback would be between the two neighboring properties, and well, 5 feet is probably the bare minimum of most of the required side yards in most of our districts. It's not significantly less than 7 feet, and it would only be between the neighboring properties that the property owner already owns. It wouldn't be affecting any of the properties to the east or west that are not owned by the current property owner. So in that sense, we feel it would not alter the essential character. The front yard setback would be probably the point that would be most, which has obviously expressed some concern amongst people in the neighborhood, but the goal of the MOR district is to promote compatibility and buildings that have a similar form and similar style throughout, and keeping the two buildings with somewhat of an equal setback would reduce the awkwardness in the placement of both or mismatched placement. The fifth criteria is that the variance will not cause a nuisance to the adjacent property. As mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be, the side yard setbacks between the properties to the east and the west would remain the same. The applicant is asking for this variance not because they want a different building form, but the storm sewer line reduces the amount of buildable area that allows them to build any sort of development in compliance with the zoning ordinance. So the level of nuisance would be rather minimal, if any exists, depending on how far it is set back. The sixth criteria is the variance represents generally the minimum deviation from requirements of the zoning ordinance necessary to accommodate the request. It's the opinion of staff that a reduction from 7 feet to 5 feet is rather minimal because of the narrow nature of both of the lots, one of them being legally non-conforming, one of them being barely at 60 feet, and the storm sewer placed below the property as well. As far as the front yard setbacks, the staff believes that a deviation of 5 feet would not be significantly greater would be probably about the bare minimum that would allow the developments to be feasible to accommodate dwelling units without deviating too far from the zoning ordinance. So with that said, once again, a major variance requires a 2/3 vote by the board.
Actually, Chris,
Yeah.
could you point out the fact that 2 of these are minor variances now?
Well, this memo states a 15 yard setback, a 15-foot setback. A 20-foot setback would be a reduction of 5 feet. and 5 feet would be considered a minor variance by the zoning ordinance. The side yard variance is still a major variance. A minor has to be approved with 2/3. It does not need to be approved at 2/3. It just needs a majority, if I'm correct. Yes. So to approve the major variance, a 2/3 vote is required by the board to forward to City Council. You may do that, or you may approve one or more of the variances with terms and conditions to the City Council. Again, 2/3 for the major, simple majority for the minor, or the variances requested may be denied. With the evidence, the staff concurs that for a motion of approving a major variance for reduction in required side yard from 7 feet to 5 feet, and for the minor variances of reduction of a required front yard setback from 25 feet to 20 feet, with the following conditions: that the site is developed in general compliance with the described conditions, except for any such modifications required by the MOR Development Review Board, provided those modifications do not exceed the requested variances, and 2, that the variance approvals are contingent upon approval of any site plan by the MOR Development Review Board. The property owner and the applicant are here to answer any questions if you have any. Before that, do you have any questions for myself or for Mr. Bennett regarding the existence of the storm sewer line on the eastern edge of the 708 property?
Does anyone have any questions for staff?
I do.
Go on.
I'd like to dig a little deeper on number
Could you lean into the mic, please? I'm sorry.
2 and number 3. And this is more about that
Of
storm
the
drain.
summary or the
Yeah, I'm
conditions?
wondering, now that it's known that there's a storm drain and maybe there's others that are unaccounted for, what does this do to other property owners that this
It would
storm
be-
drain now that want to add addition, whether they have a single family home or they want to develop an apartment? I guess whatever they want to do with it, does it also handcuff them? And
It would be premature for me to comment on the line, how it might affect other properties, because it could affect other properties in the area in different ways. For some property, it might just cut a corner across. For some, it might run under the building. There hasn't been a thorough analysis from a planning aspect to see if there.
We just found out about it, so there will be a study done. So
Okay.
To
stay
see the
tuned.
effects on other properties. So I don't want to speak ahead of. I don't want to speak ahead of any analysis or information finding that we've done regarding the issue.
But I guess it'd be safe to say that if you have a storm sewer running through that's not identified, and you had major plans or to do a renovation or new construction to your property, that you would probably fit or deal with probably same 10-foot setbacks, or not setbacks, but distances that you could
Buffer.
not,
Yeah.
buffers.
Or whatever your terminology you'd like. Yeah.
Okay. So it is, I guess it is kind of a hindrance
For
or
this-
whoever
For
may
this
have it.
particular property, it definitely is, in that it reduces the amount of buildable area because of it increases the side yard setbacks on on a narrow lot on one of the sides, on the long side of the property too, by a significant amount. So it is a hindrance on this particular property.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. There are some more questions.
Okay, I seem to ask this question all the time, but why hasn't the MOR Development Review Board looked at this before we look at this?
It was determined by staff that
Actually, we received an application for a variance. And it's my understanding the applicant can reply to this more fully, but it's my understanding that prior to going forward and presenting full-fledged plans that are required by the MOR Development Review Board, they wanted to have a good understanding on the footprint in which they could design a building. But I can let them expand on that in case there's other reasons.
So we're not to consider the design of the building?
That's correct. It's not within your purview other than the variances and the variance criteria.
All right. I'm trying to get through these emails that we just got tonight, and there's a tremendous amount of people that think that this block is owner-occupied. Is there any owner-occupied house on this block? There don't appear to be any on the map, but the single-family ones are the ones we're discussing, right?
I could speak anecdotally, but we don't have. I know some of those are have multiple units in them. The zoning ordinance doesn't really regard owner occupied versus tenant occupied too much outside of the building form, like a single family home versus a duplex, et cetera.
So then, I take this utility map that you furnished us with. That has just been generated since you just found out about this issue?
Brad can jump in, but it's my understanding that that's taken from GIS, which we do have, but it's not as though we monitor daily where utility lines are, and it's also not something that's recorded as part of a title, or that would come up as part of a title search, is my understanding.
I'm Brad Bennett, Assistant City Engineer. Just to provide a little clarification, the storm sewer has been known about for a long time. It's been on our storm sewer maps, but because of its age, there was never a recorded easement. So, I mean, nothing showed up, when they did title search on it. I mean, that's where it was surprised. We've known that sewer's been there, since the past 100 years. It was probably one of the original storm sewers constructed in Urbana. And one of the reasons it follows such a strange path was, at one time, that was probably a creek that they closed in order to build out the area. Generally nowadays, when we build storm sewers, we follow the street grid pattern, and we locate everything in right-of-way. But because there was probably an existing creek or ditch through there at the time, they simply built up a brick arch and actually came back at a later date and put a concrete bottom in it.
Any additional questions for staff? All right.
I think I need to say this. When I first got this,
Ms. Chester, could you speak into the mic more clearly? Thank you.
When I first got this, I was kind of shocked.
I'm sorry, I'm still hearing that they can't hear you. Perhaps can you lean in a little more?
I think she's leaning in as far as she can.
When I first got this, I was kind of shocked that there was a request for a approval of this variance.
That there was a request, or that there was a
That the staff,
you mean the recommendation?
the recommendation.
Okay.
Because from what I remember of when the MOR district was being worked on, one of the most significant things was setbacks from the street. For instance, on Elm Street, when that big apartment building was built so close to the street, I think 15 feet back, but the other setbacks for the houses were much further back, and so it looks horrible. So one of the things that was part of the MOR was to maintain this visual sightline, and so to have a request to have a 15-foot setback when everything is 22 to 29 feet, I just didn't understand why the staff would approve that or recommend that.
The staff considered the hardship of the storm sewer significantly reducing the buildable area on 708 and 710, as well as the parking requirements that are necessary for that area, and which has been of a strong concern of the neighborhood, as well as just the circumstances of allowing any sort of buildable units on tightly constrained lots. And I understand how you have your opinion, or your
my concern is that if if you have one in a block, then let's say the duplex on if the duplex next door were to be torn down and they want to build another, well, they'd want to be close up too, and then all of a sudden you just have this line going all the way down.
But they wouldn't have those that is a
But
valid
then you have
concern.
something
They
that's-
don't have those allowances by right, though. It still requires the
No, wait a minute. The audience will be given a time to respond. This is not a free-form discussion, so
This is just
please
between us here.
let him answer her questions without any input from anyone else.
So my question is about the importance of the setback. From my point of view, what I remember about the MOR district was that the setback was very, very important criteria for the whole idea of an MOR. And in most neighborhoods, you can't, you take the average, so we have the average. And so now it's down to 20 from 15, so that's certainly better. But I just think that, I just wish you would have thought more about the 15 and not presented that to us, because it was a shock, and I wonder, well, like, what is this? You see what I'm saying?
Mr. Chair, if I can just remind everyone that this is a chance for technical questions,
Okay.
not to go into the discussion portion of the
Okay.
conversation.
That's fine, I'm done.
And I don't know if this is a technical question, but it seems like we're starting to talk about MOR, but just for clarification, are we supposed to be talking about MOR or zoning or setbacks? Because I would need to be briefed on what.
Well, the properties are within the MOR zoning district. So the purview of this body is to consider the variances for the setbacks within that district, but not to get into things like the MOR guidelines, which comes under the purview of the MOR Development Review Board. Does that make it clearer?
However, because you're talking about the parking constraints and how many parking places will be needed depending on the design, it does affect how the square building feet available for building. So it is part of this discussion, I think.
Anyway.
Are there any other questions? The applicant desire to speak on the request.
This map? Okay, the other. There's that one.
My name's Andrew Fell. I'm the applicant and the architect for this project. And I think first I'd like to clarify a little bit of what Mr. Marks said. Is from our survey, the center line of the storm sewer on the south end of the lot is about 11 feet off the property line. And it angles a little bit to the west as it goes north. And so because the storm sewer is about 7 feet in diameter, we're almost 14 and a half feet to the west edge of the sewer line. And the engineering staff has said we need to maintain a 10-foot distance away from the storm sewer. So our setback at the minimum on the east side of the lot is going to be 24 feet 6 inches. And I think I need to reiterate that in the process of purchasing the lots, the existence of the storm sewer never came up because there's no recorded easement for it, so it wasn't in any title search or any deed work. And I believe in one of the pieces of correspondence, it mentioned that how could we not know the storm sewer was there? And we rely on a survey, which is not done until we're ready to design a building. And we do have the ability to search for some records to see what's existing, but the general public doesn't have access to the storm sewer maps. So until I request that and I know it's there, I don't have that information. as a little bit of background, when we discovered the storm sewer, we did look for other ways to develop the property, to attempt not to request a variance, and one of those was to combine the lots and build one building instead of two buildings. However, to do that under the MOR district, we're constrained by a maximum lot size. So if we combine the lots, we can build a building that's maybe a third again as big as or smaller than building separately. So if we combine the lots, we cannot build as much square footage as if we keep the lots separately. So it's in the developer's interest to keep the lots separate. I believe the variance we're asking for is really the minimum amount we can use to create a functioning building. We did because city staff had said that there was quite a bit of opposition to the request for a 15-foot front yard setback. We have increased that, or I guess decreased that request to 20 feet. That makes my job significantly harder, but in order to appease the neighborhood and city staff and your board, we're willing to do that. So other than that, I guess I'll just answer questions. I'll say one more thing. Because these maps aren't readily available, I believe in your packet there's the storm sewer map goes a couple blocks south of here. That storm sewer goes diagonally almost all the way to Indiana, maybe. It goes diagonally under people's properties. And while this particular case, I believe, is an administrative case, if city staff and engineering doesn't deal with this eventually, it's going to be a legal case, and it's going to be a potentially very large one. So I encourage city staff to proactively do something to at least inform the homeowners, get it written in their deeds, or do something that this storm sewer exists, because it will be a big problem someday.
Do you have anything to say, sir?
No, thank you very much. I would just request the board to please grant us the permission so at least we can build a decent building. That's the request we have.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Okay. I will say I'm willing to come up and answer any questions that come up during future discussions.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
At this time, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak in favor of the petitioner's request? All right, hearing none. At this time, anyone who is opposed may step forward and speak.
Hello, my name is Esther Pat, and I live at 706 South Kohler Avenue. I came here tonight to speak in opposition to the two proposed major variances for front yard setback from 25 feet to 15 feet, and I'm now confused. Is it my understanding that you are planning on voting tonight on a totally different case that is a minor variance, not a major variance, that is 20 feet instead of 15? Is that actually what is now on your agenda? And if so, could you please so inform the public?
Chair, would you like me to, or?
You can, or I will. Why don't you do it?
So that is correct. Initially, the request came in for two major variances for front yard setbacks. Since that application was submitted and notice was put out, the applicant has changed this front yard setback that's being requested to a lesser amount. This board is able to consider a lesser variance without re-notification as part of this public hearing process. So because the front yard setback request, which was 15 feet, is now at 20 feet, that makes it a minor variance rather than the initial major variance.
Okay, I understand that, but you're saying that something in the law allows you to sort of circumvent the intent of the Open Meetings Act to change the issues that you're voting on the agenda without publicly noticing that?
Well, the issue is the same. It's the front yard setback at those two properties.
Uh-huh.
This board is authorized
Okay.
to approve lesser variances than what is notified or what is noticed.
Uh-huh.
Obviously not greater variances than what is noticed.
That's very interesting interpretation of the law, but I assume you got the city attorney's opinion, or that's from some higher authority?
That's been a longstanding practice,
Okay,
yes.
very interesting. Perhaps someone will challenge that. Well, I will try to modify my testimony as briefly as possible, since, like everyone else in the room, I was not informed that you were changing from a major variance to a minor variance. But I will say it's interesting that that change is made, because in the petition for the major variance, you were told by the petitioner that a 15-foot setback, that was the minimum amount that was needed to be able to do this. They couldn't do it without 15 feet. Now they're saying 20, and I suspect the reason is because 20 is something that that makes it a minor variance, so that if you approve it, it doesn't have to go to city council, and there will be no more public input. And I think that's very wrong. The main issue with setback, whether you're in the MOR district or not, and I don't see why ZBA should not consider the physical location of the subject properties, which is the MOR district, but everywhere cities create setback requirements for the purpose of protecting the other people on the block from having their sight view blocked by somebody else building something too big. And also, cities have setback requirements so that a block doesn't just look like a hodgepodge mix of randomly dropped buildings at different times. And that's, I fear, what it's going to look like. Right now, there's a lovely, so many blocks are built at different times and different things happen. The 700 block of Green Street on the north side of the street has a very clear line, even line across, to see the square footage here, or this footage, and to see that it actually varies from 22.5 to 30 something, I forget what it was now, over 30 feet, is actually even a little surprising to me because of how even they look, but there's no question that this will stick out. I had originally said 10 to 20 feet farther than the other structures on the block, so now it'll still stick out 10 feet farther than the home next door. Right now, every structure on the block has a front porch, and actually, except for the new building at 712, which was built in very well in compliance with the MOR guidelines in terms of the spirit of it. Everything else on that block was built as a single-family home. Whenever you look at these things, they list the use apartment building and duplex. Those are single-family homes. One was converted into apartment building. A couple were converted into duplexes. The two that will be torn down were still in use as single-family homes. And I really don't, I'm sorry for the owner finding out this problem, and I know that'd be a shame to have to build only one building instead of two, or two noticeably smaller buildings, but the whole purpose of the MOR district it was created a quarter of a century ago, almost, and the whole purpose was to ensure that any new construction in this district would be compatible in size and scale and appearance. That basically was a compromise. The whole neighborhood was downzoned to single family, but multifamily was still allowed in the MOR district as long as the buildings were small enough that they didn't overpower the houses. And I think that having these two buildings just sticking out, especially in the middle of the block, if this were a corner, the ZBA granted the variance, didn't care for it much, but on a corner property several years ago, and that could make a difference, but this is right in the middle of the block, and so it's not so pronounced it'll be a T, but it still is going to be that these two properties are going to stick out. I think will ruin the appearance of the 700 block. And what's really most significant about the 700 block with regard to the MR district is what's on the 600 block, which are two owner-occupied homes, one of which on the corner, just 3 doors down from the subject property, is the Nathan Ricker House, which you may know is one of the most significant historic properties in the city of Urbana. It was the home of Nathan Ricker, who was the first graduate of the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois, who designed that home and lived in it. Not only the current owner and previous owner, but a whole lot of people in this community invested a lot of money and time, including, I actually went up on the roof, which frightened me, ripping off shingles, to try to preserve that house and keep it. And I think that when you look at investments in the neighborhood, investments in the city of Urbana. You don't just look at the developer who's sitting here today saying, oh, they want to make this investment, and gee, how can you somehow accommodate what they want? But look at the investments of the other people, the owners of the surrounding of the surrounding properties and the people in the neighborhood, and I think this will detract from it significantly. So I encourage you to, whether it's a major or minor variance, 15 or 20 feet, please deny it. They can do a 25-foot setback and build whatever they want that fits in with the other MOR guidelines, and I'm sure that they will still be able to get good value out of that property. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
I'm Carolyn Baxley. I live at 510 West Main in Urbana. And I was on the Plan Commission for 8 years, and during that 8 years, we drafted the language for the MOR district. And we set the restrictions that are now in the ordinance, and those were passed by City Council at the time. And I can assure you that the project before you tonight is the very antithesis of the intent of the district. And I disagree with staff that you shouldn't be talking about this, because you have to talk about it if you're going to actually consider voting on this tonight. There was total agreement among the members of that Plan Commission that the look of Green and Elm Streets needs to be carefully preserved, while still allowing some infill development that's compatible with the district, and some even small businesses, perhaps, reusing the existing structures. So you need to focus tonight on the purpose for which it was established, and not be misled or distracted by peripheral arguments that conflict with our own city ordinance. I assume you've read it, and maybe it was passed out in the packet. I didn't see that, but I would like to, direct your attention to it, and I've given you a copy of the ordinance, the section that's pertinent tonight. The MOR residential district is intended to provide areas for a limited variety of business, office, and residential land uses in proximity to low-density residential dwellings, in order to promote the economic viability and preservation of older residential structures while protecting the aesthetic and residential character of the area. Skipping down, the district is intended to encourage the adaptive reuse of these older residential structures as an incentive to preserve and extend the useful life of such structures, while also allowing compatible new development. The MOR district is also intended to promote the conservation of buildings and neighborhoods, which in combination or individually are of unique community and neighborhood significance. The land uses permitted and the development regulations required in the MOR district are intended to protect nearby residential uses by limiting the scale and intensity of the uses and buildings that may locate in this district. The MOR district is appropriate for mixed uses on small sites which need a careful evaluation of use-to-use compatibility so that the stability and value of surrounding properties are best protected. There have been cases recently, and this one certainly falls into that category, that are in direct opposition to the intent of this district. And as you notice from the reading, the words protect and preserve are used several times in the stated purpose. I've given you also a picture of a property, and Esther made reference to this, I think, at 506 West Elm Street. You'll notice in the three photos, the two buildings on either side of this property, and the setbacks are significant. But this property was allowed to slip through the cracks, and it was a result of 506 West Elm that we now have average setbacks in Urbana. Now, granted, the project before you tonight is not going to be this extreme. With the 20-foot, it won't be anywhere near this extreme. But the point is, as Esther has pointed out, it will interrupt the block face. It will project out in the center of the block face so that it completely interrupts the flow of the block. It's going to affect property values in other areas. And, you know, I'm also regretful that this owner was not aware of the storm sewer thing. But it's not really incumbent upon the city, I think, to compensate for that type of oversight by changing your ordinance or looking the other way and not applying the ordinance as it's written. So it seems to me that the only decision this body can make is to deny the variances, whether major or minor, and insist that the intent and spirit of the MOR district is respected, and that the current buildings, either they build within the existing footprint or, you know, you deny the request. So I'd like to ask that you deny the request for the variances.
Thank you.
Harvey, can I ask you something? Not right now.
My name is Dan Newman. I live at 612 West Green Street. My house is the Nathan Ricker House on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's within 250 feet of the subject property. I'm speaking today in opposition to the requested variance. I guess first I have a technical question. So I just read the application, the variance application. I couldn't find it online for some reason, but is it true that the 710 West Green property is not even encumbered by the storm sewer? So there'll be no real case for seeking that variance?
The 708 is the one affected by the storm sewer. It does not run under 710.
Okay.
710's on the west, so.
So I don't understand that there's any real case for seeking the variance for 710. Another thing I want to point out is in the application that I just read, according to the application itself, the current average setback on that block is 30 feet, 11 3/4 inches. So that would be 31 feet is the current average setback.
And that was an error, actually, in the applicant's interpretation. I'm sorry, is it all right if I address that?
Yeah.
The applicant did not calculate the average depth correctly because he did not insert the 15 feet, which by ordinance we can count any of the properties that would be demolished at 15-foot setback. He did not include that in his calculation, so it would make it a larger setback, average setback, than in actuality our code would require.
So, okay, so the applicant himself went with a ruler and figured out, or with measuring tape and figured out that the average setback is in fact 31 feet. But there's some other stuff in the ordinance that suggests that you don't count the actual setbacks like they're 31 feet, 32 feet for the current properties. You just assume they are demolished and then average in a 15-foot. Is that correct?
The ordinance allows you to calculate those at 15 feet if they are intended to be demolished.
Okay, I mean, I respect the ordinance, but just for the sake of what, so criterion number 4 is character of the neighborhood, and so I'm thinking if you're averaging in 2 15s, but it's actually 31, okay. I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just trying to understand. Okay, thanks. All right, so here's the issue for me. I want to clarify that just where I'm coming from, I do like college students, I do like landlords. I've been a college student, I've been a landlord, so I'm not anti, anything with regard to that. I have 3 points to make. First, that zoning is a contract between the city and its residents. And so the variances being requested would break the contract and constitute a violation of our written agreement. Those of us who bought into West Urbana and who live here and maintain our properties have entered into an agreement with the city, defined by the rules of the ordinance, so the variances being requested today simply break the rules. Second thing, and this is one I think maybe a lot of people in the room might agree on, is that we need a beautiful and attractive, inviting corridor between campus and downtown. And I think that's really important. So for me, zoning can also be thought of as a contract between the city and its future self. The Zoning Board of Appeals is in a position to render opinions on that essentially define what Urbana is. So when we think about our future and who we want to be, I'd like to see Urbana develop a beautiful corridor from campus to Lincoln Square in downtown Urbana, consistent with Phase 5 of the MCOR project, in which the city is using a grant to build bike lanes and encourage more walking and bike traffic to downtown and Lincoln Square Mall. I think that's really important. I'd like to see the corridor from campus to downtown be beautiful, tree-lined, and something that people want to walk on and want to ride their bikes on. I mean, I think we can accomplish a beautiful thing that is somewhat uniquely Urbana. I wouldn't want to see what some people might think of as a canyon, like if you build the houses, the structure is really tall and close to the sidewalk. It doesn't have the same aesthetic. So just to be more clear about what I mean, I'm going to show you some pictures and see, just so you can get a sense of, since you're the board, you make the decisions, get a sense of whether you agree with the way I see things. So here's walking from down Green Street from campus to Lincoln Square or the Farmers Market. So this is the corridor from campus to downtown. The houses are fairly large houses the way I think about them, two-story and three-story houses. Everybody on the left side here on the north side seems to have a large green space, 25 to 30 feet. Now that I've read the application, the average here is, on this block, is 31 feet, okay? So to me, this looks pleasant. This is me riding my bike down, you know, or I guess walking, because I don't ride my bike on the sidewalk, or I'm not supposed to. Sometimes I do. And then here's another one just from a little bit back. The green space required by the zoning helps keep the corridor attractive and inviting. And then this is my really crude depiction of what a 15-foot setback would look like, because that's what I prepared for, which would cut off a lot of green space. And so just... the current zoning is already very generous. So here you have the 710 property on the right, which is the yellow house, and you have 712 West Green, which is the poster child for what the MOR could do in terms of what I consider to be really big apartment complexes, but it's in the zoning ordinance as a good example of what you can build. And if you go from what's the yellow house to the house next to it, you're building something that's 2 or 3, 4 times bigger. And to me, that's really generous the way it's already written. So I think we're not depriving people in some major way to enable them to tear down a house, build something a lot bigger that's within the zoning ordinance. This is another picture from down the street, and just to get a visual. And again, you see you're cutting off a lot of green space, removing all the trees. And it does change the way the corridor looks, really fundamentally, in my opinion, but it's the pictures, you can make your own opinion. And if you don't believe my crude pictures, this again is the thing that Carolyn Baxley printed out and showed you. This property actually has over 15-foot setback. It's a 15-foot, 8-inch setback. I measured it today. And what you should know about these setbacks is they don't include the stuff that sticks out in the front. I would call it a porch, but on houses like this one on the left here, that's not considered part of the setback. So that porchy stuff that sticks out in front is not in the setback. So you're going 4 or 5 feet in front of that. All right, so that's a secret thing they don't necessarily tell you. So this is what we're proposing with a 15-foot, 8-inch setback. And if so if you're saying now it's going to be 20. So it's back a little more, but it's not in the ballpark for what the ordinance requires, and we're already being super generous with the ordinance. And then the last thing I want to talk about is making a short-term business case to justify violation of zoning. So you can make a short-term business case for a lot of different zoning violations. So for example, you could sell part of Carl Park and build a big apartment complex on it, and there's a good short-term business case for doing that. Some people would make a lot of money on it, and the city might make money on it. So that case is there. But I object to that general form of argument, that the financial situation of the developer, or the developer's argument that we should ignore zoning because zoning's not in the best interest of the developer financially, or the argument that the zoning rules somehow deprive the developer of profit that they're entitled to somehow. I reject the argument that 25-foot setbacks are not cost-effective or not financially viable. And you hear these kinds of arguments. Every landlord knows there are two different ways you can make money. One way is the slow way, where you make the neighborhood more beautiful. This is by maintaining your property, investing in the visual amenities of your property and of the neighborhood, beautiful landscaping, yards, making the corridor pretty, nice setbacks, trees, excellent upkeep of the structures. This method does not guarantee that the property will immediately cash flow. It's the slow way, okay? But it does build wealth and equity for the owner in the long term, and it does turn a sizable profit in the long term. So the other way is that landlords can make money the fast way, and that's a way that makes the neighborhood less beautiful. So this entails making buildings much bigger, 3 times bigger in a lot of cases in the MOR, eliminating yard space and green space until there's almost none, having parking lots instead of yards, removing all the trees, essentially neglecting the beauty of the neighborhood and the surrounding structures. That's the fast way to make money. So there's the short way that a landlord can make money, and there's the fast way that a landlord can make money. When an architect or developer that the architect works for makes the claim that adherence to a zoning ordinance is not financially viable, they actually mean something really specific. And that thing that they mean is, if you adhere to the zoning ordinance, if you follow the rules, you can't make money the fast way. That's what they're saying. So my understanding is that one major reason that we have zoning in Urbana is to prevent the fast-paced, short-term profitability model that would make Urbana less beautiful and that would compromise the corridor. So the section of Green Street we're discussing today is the corridor from campus to downtown. It must look beautiful and be an attractive place to stroll and ride your bike. It has to be, for the sake of the residents like me and for the sake of the businesses in downtown and Lincoln Square. For many U of I students, the corridor is the face of Urbana. So all the houses in this section of Green Street have notable green space in front, 25-foot setback or greater. We see that the average is 31 feet. Allowing these variances will violate not only the zoning ordinance itself, but also the underlying purpose of it. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, you have to sign in.
Good evening. My name is Kara McKinn, and I live on Orchard Street here in Urbana. And I think my letter might be in the packet, but I wanted to touch base on some of the points I made. Once again, the tax-paying residents of Western Urbana neighborhood find themselves in opposition to Urbana city employees who have opted to support this variance, this time at 708 and 710. It confounds me how consistently the city staff overrides the ordinances, the MOR, the wishes of the neighborhood, for people looking to make a buck off our neighborhood. Certainly these builders and owners benefit from the neighborhood we live in and we invest in, but they sure don't want to live by the rules that the rest of us have chosen to and that have been set up to ensure the quality of the area. We chose to live in WUNA for its benefits. We understand those benefits, and those benefits come with rules and cost, considering how we're all paying those taxes. But that's a choice we've made. It seems to me that there's a roll of the dice here on the city staff, rolling over on these ordinances again and again, and I can see why the developer and the owner took the chance, because it's a good bet that that would happen again. I couldn't say it better than my neighbor, Tina Gonzalez, who said the commercial concerns of investors should not trump the concerns of law-abiding voters and property owners in this owner-occupied residential neighborhood. Those investors have no stake in the quality of life in our neighborhood beyond their professional, financial concerns. Yet it's this investment of the families who live and invest in West Urbana that ultimately increases the value and prestige of this neighborhood, the award-winning neighborhood, as we know. I ask you not to jeopardize the value and quality of this significant investment that we've made in our neighborhood for one person. Prior approvals for setbacks have been definitively proven to degrade their surrounding neighborhoods. Obviously, the infamous 506 West Elm. Approving this setback promotes a further slippery slope, and I think my predecessors have made a great argument for that. And that will degrade the quality and value of this owner-occupied residential neighborhood. Basically, irreversibly. You can't go back just for one person, and then the next people who sit here and say, well, yeah, but he got it. Well, how can you argue, yeah, but he was special and there's the sewer? I mean, to me, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen that one person got it. So I respectfully appreciate your time and your understanding of these issues and their complexity, and I would request that you deny this variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, before you start, I think you came in after I swore in the witnesses, so I need to swear you in.
Oh, sure.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give tonight will be true and accurate to the best of your ability?
Yes, I do.
You need to raise your right hand like that. You do?
Yeah, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sarah McAvoy, 805 West Michigan Avenue. Thank you all for serving. You're here because you care. I do too. The development regulations required in the MOR district are intended to protect nearby residential uses by limiting the scale and intensity of the uses in buildings that may locate in this district. ... so that the stability and value of surrounding properties are best protected. I just think this is a simple case of the architect needing to go back and redesign. A third smaller, a third less profit. How is that your problem? How is that the city's problem? I think it's just, there's a constraint, and I'm sorry, but here are the rules, and we abide by them. I appreciate the language of a contract between the citizen and the Zoning Board of Appeals and the intent behind what's written. And so I ask that you deny the minor variance for this said property. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? May I interrupt you, please? Would you sit in the next chair?
Okay, thank you. I'm Linda Lorenz. I live at 409 West High. I was born and raised in Urbana. I ride down Green Street on my bicycle, and I do it because I can see old houses and my neighborhood. And I would like you to take in consideration that we that live in the Woona area are there for a reason, and we don't want it to be destroy the beauty and the wonderfulness of our old home and our wonderful neighborhood.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? I believe you also came in after, so I
did.
Need to swear you in. Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give tonight would be fair and accurate to the best of your ability?
I do.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Steve Ross. My wife and children and I'm sorry. I can do that.
Thank you.
I probably can't talk and I am talking and signing at the same time. My wife and I and children live at 609 West Green Street, just a block away, just outside that 250-foot notification radius, I think, but nonetheless very close. I just want to speak to 2 points. The first is one of your criteria is that the variance that's requested will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. I think Dan Newman made a good point that going from the existing 30-foot setback to a 20-foot setback, and I'm sure it will not be a single-story building, will present, will take away a lot of that green space, a lot of the character that you can see, as he pointed out, you can see down the street. So that's the first point, and that's, I think, criteria number 4 that you're evaluating. Number 6 was that the proposed variance represents generally the minimum deviation from the zoning ordinance necessary to accommodate the requested requirement. As Ms. Pat pointed out yesterday, the minimum, we were told, was 25 feet. Today we're told, it was 15. Today we're told it's 20. I suggest it could easily be 25. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Michael Pleva. I have lived in Urbana since 1974. I purchased my home in 1978, and I live at 708 West Iowa Street. I was here through the discussions that established the campus to downtown plan and also the MOR. I am speaking in opposition to whatever variance this group has come up with. I came here as to talk about a major variance, and now I see that they've changed their tone, which I actually protest. If you're going to do something like that, I think you just write up a new application. I think that this is incorrect procedure. But let's think about why we are here. The MOR encourages the adaptive reuse of existing structures. I see nothing in a discussion here that the houses that are in there cannot be used adaptively to repair. I suppose it could reduce profit, okay, but that's not the function of the zoning of the Zoning Board of Appeals or the zoning ordinances. We don't guarantee absentee landlords profits on property. The other thing that I think is important is that, again, as we've talked about, are these setbacks and the fact that the Green Street and Elm Street corridors really is the downtown to campus program. In 2010, I bought the property adjacent to my home at 708 West Iowa Street. I know that this area of Urbana has all kinds of hidden structures underground. I went to the city engineer and asked them, and I got all the information I needed. Now, this is a person who's an individual owner-occupied residence, okay? What we have here is a commercial interest. This is not a person who's building a house on this piece of property. I can understand using only the title for that, but we're talking about a commercial interest here. And for their lack of due diligence, they're asking to change the zoning laws. I'm sorry that this sewer happens to be there. But if I were operating as a commercial interest, a profit-making interest, I sure would do proper due diligence. It is not the function of us to have to pay with the destruction and the reduction of our zoning ordinances for their lack of due diligence. Finally, I want to point out one thing. I sent everybody on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and members of WUNA, the 2007 American Planning Association Award for the West Urbana neighborhood. And specifically in the award that we got, it was talking about the downtown to campus plan that adopted in 1990 the mixed office residential to promote adaptive reuse of older homes along Elm and Green Streets. So this is what we got this prestigious award is. I want to point out, I looked this up on the web today, and we are the only neighborhood in Illinois south of I-80 that has received this award. This award was not generated because of absentee landlords, but because of owner-occupied individuals and citizens who together constructed the downtown to campus plan and the MOR. And I request that you reject this request for variance for these setbacks. Thank you very much.
Come forward.
Hello, I'm Richard Cahill. I've been a resident of Urbana for over 40 years, and I've been a member, past president of the Preservation Group PACA. I served on the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission for probably about 10 years. So I appreciate your service to the community, and I think more citizens need to get involved in such boards. When I moved to Urbana, I picked my first property was on 800 block of Clark. At the point, I didn't know what the zoning was, and that was part of the campus of downtown plan back in the 90s. It went all the way to the University Avenue and then on up. Next, in 1988, I bought my property at 307 South Orchard. I knew I'm next to students. It was a rooming house to the north of me, rooming houses to the east of me. To the south, I have Tina Gonzalez, I have Dan Corkery, the managing editor of News Gazette. So it's a good mix. And the difference is I could afford living there. I could buy that house for $80,000 back then. I couldn't afford to live on Iowa Street. I still couldn't. It's very disheartening to sit here, and I think we were just here a few weeks ago over another case in the neighborhood, that the intent of all the hard work to go through the MOR is just being ignored by city staff. Setbacks were there for a reason. So I don't like that suddenly it goes from 20 to 15. It's almost intentional. Let's go for minor variances because the major ones might have been shot down. I don't think that looks so much for open meetings. That's, to me, is far from being open. I call it 600 block ground zero because a lot of the major cases came down on that block. 601 Green was a classic case. They were able to get major variances with no public hearing, no public notice. They cut down all the trees along the property line. They poured concrete from the backyard right to my fence with no public. I had to come to ZPA and ask for some kind of, I could protest. By that point, it was way too late. Everything was granted. Everything was down. We made the front page of News Gazette multiple times. People would stop me at antique shows and say, we really feel sorry for what they did to you. Well, now I'm at the point, what's my property value when, first impression, if you come up Orchard Street, you see nothing but parked cars facing directly into my living room. Now, true, there's a privacy fence. Well, if you're a pedestrian, and the city allowed this, if you're walking north on Orchard Street, I'm surprised nobody's been killed yet because those cars come out of that parking lot, they cannot see anything. That is a 100% privacy fence and it's 6 feet high. And that's against the spirit of a fence with open. My fence, right to the south of it's 50% open, no 4 feet high. So I feel frustrated as a homeowner. My property rights are not being respected. I'm not going to get the value. Will a single family want my house with a parking lot right next door? So this 700, 710 is going to change the character of the neighborhood. It'll be, Andrew designed some very nice properties. PACA has given Andrew numerous awards over the years because he does make compatible and nice design. But it's, you're violating the whole spirit of what the ordinance says and what it wanted to do. We mentioned the Ricker House. Well, that was scheduled for demolition. PACA, I was involved. We made the decision to purchase that house. We spent a lot of years, and we've had 3 different families live in that house. And I said families, young families. Dan's got 3 young kids. Steve Ross is, he'll speak. He's got a full family. He came to town with 3, and it doubled when he came to Urbana. So it is not a lot of residential, but there's a lot of long-term people like I'm a block away, and I think this affects my property value. It's just one more nail in the coffin of my property value as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Want me to sign in first? Is it the drill here?
Or sign in while you speak, or sign in after, just as long as you sign in.
Okay, my name is Michael Walker. I live at 511 West High Street along with my wife, Tina Gonzalez. I hope that you all have received the letter that she and I composed and signed and sent forward to you. So I don't want to speak for a long time and rehash all of this, although I do note the case has changed slightly. They're now talking about a 20-foot setback. I'd just like to point out that with a 25-foot setback, which is what they would have by right without a variance, it's already going to change the block a bit by the fact that they're talking about not reusing two single-story buildings, but rather obviously going to be going up a good bit higher than that. And keeping the setbacks that one might have without a variance, there have been both a building reuse, 2 doors to the west, and a new construction 1 door to the west from the subject properties that have kept these kinds of setbacks and have kept that block, I think, looking quite reasonable. And I think I would highly encourage the ZBA to not approve this variance to the setbacks, but rather ask that the design be built with a setback that's in keeping with the nature of that block and the other houses in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Come forward, sir.
I'll sign this later. I don't have a pen with me, sorry. My name is Brian Adams. I live at 907 West Daniel Street in Champaign. I lived for over 10 years in the Moore neighborhood on West Elm Street, where I had 2 houses, old houses, which I was in the process of renovating. I served on the Moore Design Review Board for several years, so I'm very familiar with the area and the rules and regulations. I just wanted to thank you. Also express my disagreement with allowing the setback to be granted. I think that the streetscape concept in historic old neighborhoods is very important. Page 8 of the design guidelines for the Moore District specifically says the placement of a building should not drastically change or cause a visual disruption along the block. So I think any sort of tinkering with the setbacks in this neighborhood would really go against the whole spirit of the Moore District and its intent to maintain and preserve its historic appearance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. I'm Carl Weingartner from 210 West Vermont Street. My comments will, since I'm going later, are not all that different from some of the other comments that have been given earlier, so I will try to be brief. I think all of us want to preserve the character of this area. Apartment buildings that are going to be built in this area should be of a size that are compatible with the surrounding properties that are single-family houses. On the block where the setbacks are 30 feet, buildings that are going to be built should be on the block, should if they're going to have the setbacks less than that, it should not get in the way of the sight line from the other porches. And as other people who've talked about tonight, they should not detract from the overall view and should not make things look unaesthetic. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to be heard? Does the petitioner have any response to what has been said?
Again, I just have a couple points of clarification to be sure that you understand that this is not a hardship that the owner is imposing on himself. We had no idea the storm sewer was there, and in relation to that, while this property happens to be in the MOR district, this really isn't an MOR discussion, because if the same storm sewer happened in an R6 district, we'd be asking for the same thing. It's really not an MOR issue. Our intent all along is we will build everything else by rights in the MOR district. We're not going to ask for any other variances, no other alterations to any other MOR requirement. And to clarify why we're asking for the setback at 710 is it's our intent to build two buildings that are in concert with each other, which will lessen the impact on the disruption on the street. It's our intent to build neighboring buildings that complement each other. So that's why we're asking for the additional setback at 710. And do you have any other questions? I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
If the storm sewer wasn't there, could you build your project on the property?
We had every intent to build by rights in the MOR district with no variances until we were informed that the storm sewer was there. And again, it showed up on there's no easement, it's not recorded on any deeds. We had no way of knowing it was there.
Go ahead.
And I see your proposal is for a 6-unit building, and I assume that's 6 units for each lot.
No,
and it seems to me that, according to the MOR, we are not supposed to be increasing density in the MOR district. I just wanted to make that point.
Well, I believe city staff can clarify if they need to, but by rights we can build a 6-unit apartment in the MOR district.
Any further questions? Thank you. Before we call this motion for a vote, I have a few comments. Number one, I want all of you to understand the title of this body. It's the Zoning Board of Appeals. Now, whatever we decide, I believe it was referred to that the zoning ordinances or some kind of contract. In those ordinances, there are mechanisms for appeal, which I assume to some of you then would be breaking of those contracts. So, as I said, we are an appeal board to say yes or no, but it is not necessarily to strictly follow what is in the zoning ordinances. There would be no need for an appeal. You would merely just refer to the zoning, and if it didn't fit. So I wanted to make that point, and then further, there has been some comments directed about open meetings. And I don't profess to be an expert on the open meetings law, but I believe that it is primarily directed at bodies meeting, conducting business amongst themselves in private that should be conducted in public. We are proceeding here in public, hearing your complaints and the petition. Now, the change in the petition from a major to minor variance, I suppose we could have told the petitioner, we're going to postpone this hearing and have you then change the wording to make it a minor variance, and therefore I assume that some of you would still been in opposition, but you would have that as not being of a concern. We have heard your complaints. We heard them tonight. We could have heard them later. I don't know how any of that really would change the issue, other than, yes, there is a difference in the procedures that follow approval of a major variance versus approval of a minor variance. But I just feel the need to state that I don't think there's anything nefarious about any of that. As I said, we could have postponed this and come back in a month and hashed it all out then, but we've chosen to do that now. Thank you. All right.
Can I say something?
Yes, I'm now going to entertain any comments from any board members, any questions.
I guess that was one of the things I wanted clarification on, is whole zoning board of appeals, I guess, and what we were supposed to take into consideration tonight. And so thank you for making that a lot clearer. I think it's great that there's a lot of public input and interest in this. I think there's a lot of commentary on rights, looks, economics, and as a zoning board of appeals, I think that's something I have to listen to, but I have to table for now, because if we're here for zoning and the circumstance at hand is this storm sewer, that I assume that not all properties in Luna or Urbana as a whole have, but would discover if they were making improvements to their buildings, is a special circumstance, and exactly why we exist as a zoning board of appeals. And like you said, if it was cut and dry where setbacks are setbacks and that's what we have to deal with, then unfortunately whoever has a storm sewer, then that's your setback. But like I said, we exist to hear cases like this, and I feel like given that criteria and as a body of zoning, hearing zoning cases, I think for me it's pretty straightforward that this is a special circumstance. And it's interesting that, yes, that we're going from 25 feet to 20, but if that's something that both the developer and the architect are proposing, as going from a major to a minor, it only helps a lot of the setback discussion in terms of this special circumstance. So I don't know, I just want to leave that despite all the kind of comments that have happened.
Anyone else have any additional comments? Any additional questions for staff? Hearing none at this time, then I am interested in if anyone has any motions to make. Motion.
I'd like to make a motion.
Go right ahead.
I'd like to make a motion for ZBA case 216 Major 02, ZBA case 2016 Major 03, ZBA case 2016 Major 04, that the request for variances be denied, and that the reasons to be given for the denial are that it's not compatible with the MOR district guidelines, and that it is a request of community and neighborhood members that this variance not go forth.
It's been moved. Is there a second to that?
Since these are major and minor, don't we have to separate them?
I was going to address that if they got seconded.
Okay.
Is there a second to the motion? Hearing none. Hearing no second, I believe under Robert's rules, that motion then dies. All right. Do we have any other motions to take up and address?
I will move to, to approve ZBA case 2016 Major 02, a request by Andrew Fell for a major variance to allow a reduction in the required side yard setback from 7 feet to 5 feet at 708 West Green Street in the MOR Mixed Office Residential District.
It's now been moved that ZBA 2016 Major 02 be considered. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that one.
It's now been moved and seconded. Call that for a vote, please.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Ms. Uteman?
No.
Mr. Warmbrad?
Yes.
Mr. Weiskopf? Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Ms. Chester? Yes. And Mr. Cho?
Yes.
That motion is approved by the necessary margin to forward that on to the City Council for their consideration as is required for any major variance. And when would that be?
May 2nd.
Thank you. Now, that still leaves ZBA case 2016 Major 03 and ZBA case Major 04 pending. Are there any motions in regards to those two cases? Correct. It's been pointed out that they're minors. I think that would just affect what the necessary vote would be, or do we have to actually amend the caption?
Well, the caption is what's been advertised,
Yeah.
so in order to maintain a record for the case as a major, you should vote on it as a major. You could include in your motion the change and actually list the setback to be clear what it is you're voting on.
All right, though, if you would clarify, for me, is this required to be approved by 4/5?
No, a minor variance requires a simple majority.
Okay, so even though it's going to remain captioned as a major, the vote will be tabulated according to the requirements for a minor variance.
Correct, because the request is now a minor.
All right.
I mean, is there opposition to keeping it a major and getting 15? I don't know. Is there discussion on that?
I'm sorry, now what?
Was there discussion on even allowing 15, or I guess we're just assuming
The
that it's
pe-
down to 20?
The petitioner
Oh, they changed
made
it,
the
yeah.
request that they were amending their
Right,
request.
that's right.
So they've done it. Now, I'm lost. Was that seconded? It was seconded? No.
Someone has to move.
Oh, all right.
I make a motion to approve ZBA case 2016 Major 03 and ZBA case 2016 Major 04, amending the setback instead of 15 feet to 20.
Is there a second? Is there a second to that motion?
I second the motion.
It's now been moved and seconded. You need to call that motion, or we will vote on those, I think, combined. We will call those motions for a vote.
I should point out that there is a condition, or two conditions, that you could amend a motion to be sure that they're included. Would you like me to read those?
Yes. Why don't you read those?
The first one being that the site is developed in general compliance with the described conditions, except for any such modifications required by the MOR Development Review Board, provided those modifications do not exceed the requested variances. And number two, the variance approvals are contingent upon approval of any site plan by the MOR Development Review Board.
I believe then we need to back up and have new motions made. The previous motions, I would ask that those be withdrawn.
Okay, revised motion. I move to approve ZBA case 2016 Major 03 and ZBA case 2016 Major 04, modifying 15 feet to the setback of 15 feet to 20 feet for both. In addition, assuring that the site is developed in general compliance with the described conditions, except for any site modifications required by the MOR Development Review Board, provided those modifications do not exceed the requested variances, and the variance approvals are contingent upon approval of any site plan by the MOR Development Review Board.
Is there a second to those two motions? It's now been moved and seconded. We need to call that for a vote.
Ms. Huetman?
No.
Mr. Warmbrun?
Yes.
Mr. Weiskopf?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Ms. Chester?
No.
Mr. Cho?
Yes.
And Ms. McLaughlin?
No.
I believe the motion's carry then, since they're now minor. And they're approved. They're now minor, we have 4 yeses, it's simple majority. All right, let me see. Do we have any old business? Is there any new business?
Yes, I would like to ask a question for a future. When the setbacks are looked at by the city planners, and you give a 15-foot setback to the property that's going to be demolished, rather than the existing setback of the existing home, I'd like to see that modified. I'd like to see that discussed and modified. It just seems to me that if you give it a 15-foot setback in your calculations, that it drastically changes the outcome.
Does the staff care to respond?
We'll look into it and take it up.
I was going to say, I think that that is, again, something that would have to be addressed by a different body than this one. Again, this is the Zoning Board of Appeals, just to hear issues regarding zoning, not necessarily what would be the appropriate setbacks, but whether or not variances and other conditions can be granted. All right. Is there any audience participation? Any staff report? Any study session? Then I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.